I've been bow hunting elk for 20 years now. I've been fortunate enough to harvest quite a few with the stick and string, and I've learned a lot of lessons along the way. So in this video, I'm going to share 10 timeless archery elk tactics to help you in the woods. The first tactic, this is a really obvious thing, but I preach it over and over, and I've been on so many hunts where people don't do this and they don't kill an elk as a result. And that is, to kill an elk, you have to draw your bow. Super obvious, right? But if you're in a calling scenario and an elk is running in to the call, sometimes you're not going to be able to range the elk. He's going to be close. You just need to draw your bow so that when the elk runs into your shooting lane, you can just shoot quick. Like I said, I've been on many hunts, specifically when we're calling, doing calling setups, where here comes the elk, and whoever is the shooter is just waiting for that perfect opportunity to range and then draw and then shoot. And often you don't have that, especially with elk hunting. So to kill an elk, you've got to draw your bow first. The second tactic that helps me out a lot is to visualize ranges. So throughout the entire year, I will just look at a feature on the ground and I'll be like, that is 28 yards away. And then I'll pace it off because each one of my footsteps is basically the same as a yard to see how close I am. Specifically in elk hunting, often you're not going to be able to range, or you're going to be able to pre-range things. And then if you're in a calling setup, the elk's just going to come in. And again, you have to draw your bow often before you can range. So being good at guessing your yardages is super key. So don't be so reliant on the rangefinder. Generally speaking, I can guess 10 yards quite accurately. So if I look at the ground in front of me and I'm like, all right, that's 10 yards right there. And if I double it, then that's 20. And if I add, do it again, that's 30, 40, so on. Guessing those 10-yard increments can be a pretty effective way to guess yardage in the field. Third tactic, this one is going to be a little counterintuitive, and the reason is because I primarily hunt by myself. This tactic is do not call. Instead, let the elk do all the talking, just sneak in, dog the herd until you get a shot. So let's expand on that a little bit more. So when you are hunting with a partner and one person's calling, you have the caller back here, you have the shooter here, and then maybe you're calling at an elk over here. And the elk is going to come running in, and he's probably going to hang up about where the shooter is, and that's how you get your shot. When you just have one person and you're calling, every time you call, if you're calling at an elk and here he comes, you're call, eventually you have to move because that elk is going to hang up like well before he gets to where the sounds are coming from. And so if you're solo hunting, again, you have to call and you have to move and then hope that that elk just keeps coming because he's curious. Typically what happens is if you're calling, you get an elk fired up and here he comes, he's starting to come, and then you move, and then if you shut up because you're like, well, I've moved, I can't call anymore, that elk's gonna hang up like back here probably. He's not gonna keep coming. That has happened to me so many times in my earlier years of bow hunting. What I learned to do is just don't call. I don't make a peep. Occasionally I'll make some cow sounds if I'm just trying to get a bull riled up, but I will let all the elk do the talking and not let them know that there's anything here. I don't want them to think there's an elk here. Obviously don't want them to think there's a human. I'll just let the elk do all the talking. I'll get the wind right, and then I will just sneak in and try to dog the herd. And if you can kind of get it in amongst the herd with the wind right, they will eventually filter by you and you should get your shot. That is how I've killed pretty much every single elk I've ever shot. So if you're solo hunting on your next elk hunt, maybe try not calling. And the fourth timeless elk hunting tactic, this one is probably my biggest pet peeve when I'm hunting with friends or with partners. It is to cut all human noises. The sounds of coughing, sniffling, clearing your throat, pant legs rubbing together, uncontrollable laughter from my wife who loves to laugh, water sloshing around in your water bottle. Like, all these sounds are not natural to the elk woods, and if an elk hears that, they're gonna boogie. So cut all those human noises. One thing I like to do additionally is when I'm sneaking around the elk woods, especially when I'm dogging a herd, I will put safari sneakers over my boots or shoes or whatever footwear I'm wearing. What these are is they're basically a Berber fleece bootie that goes over whatever boot or shoe you're wearing, and it completely muffles the sound of your footsteps, and also if you brush up against any plants or anything, it just won't make any noise. Be quiet in the elk woods. Cut all those human noises. And the fifth tip is to always bring a tarp with you. So as hunters, I feel like we spend so much time just focused on getting to the point where we actually release a shot, or just like focusing on the shot itself. We don't really spend that much time focused on, okay, what do we do once we get an animal down? So that's where tarp comes in. With a tarp, after you kill an elk, say you walk up to it, sweet, whatever, take pictures. Then when you start to process it and pull the quarters off and debone and do all that, what I like to do is I just lay an 8x10 tarp, usually a Dyneema one. Dyneema is the lightest fabric out there, so it has minimal weight consequence. But I lay an 8x10 tarp right next to the carcass. I stake it out in 4 corners so it's nice and taut, and then I have a very clean surface that I use to lay the quarters and lay all the meat onto before I debone and then throw it into game bags. Wild game meat is just so precious. It would be such a shame to drop a big 90-pound quarter into the dirt and just get the thing filthy. So 8x10 Dyneema tarp, that goes in my pack during elk season. Tip number 6 is use your nose. If you are out bow hunting and you're sneaking through the woods and all of a sudden you get a big whiff of elk, big musky smell of mix between piss and pine, it probably means there's an elk really close. There's been a few times where I've just been standing there and all of a sudden I get a whiff of elk, and lo and behold, there's a bull standing 50 yards away. Use your nose, trust your instincts. Elk, especially in the rut, because they're peeing all over themselves, they are especially stinky and pungent. I think it's a great smell, actually. I think if they could put that in a bottle, I'd probably pay for it as cologne. But anyway, use your nose. Tip number 7. A hit bull will almost always run back in the direction in which he came. Often the most stressful part of all of bow hunting is right after you release a shot. Even if you make a perfect shot, but as soon as the animal runs out of view, instantly, you're questioning yourself. You're like, did I get him? And often we're gonna wait probably 45 minutes before we start blood trailing. And once we do start blood trailing, say we lose the blood trail, or say after a half hour of looking, we haven't found the animal yet, it gets really stressful. It's a terrible feeling. And many of the bulls that I've killed or hunts that I've been a part of when we're blood trailing or when we're tracking, every single elk, when we've lost the blood trail, if we just know, okay, that elk came from that direction. We called him in from way the heck over there. That is typically the direction in which a wounded bull will go. They will always run back to a place that they know, a place that they think is safe. They've walked through that, they've smelled it. They're like, okay, there's no danger over here. They're almost always gonna run back that direction. And so if you lose the blood trail, can't find him, and you're like, well, he came from over there. He came in to my calls or whatever. He came in this way. Just backtrack him. Just search for him that way. Recovered many elk doing that. Also recovered a couple stag in New Zealand. I was just photographing these hunts and we lost the blood trail. Everybody was looking this way and I was like, well, the bull came from over there. So I went that way. Sure enough, I found him. The other thing about that is if you get really close, A, you're probably gonna smell the elk because it's gonna get really, really strong. And B, if they're still alive, this is a bit morbid, but you're probably gonna hear them breathing. You're gonna be hearing this really heavy breathing sound. If you hear that, you're probably within 20 yards. That one tactic of just searching in the direction from which the elk came from after you make a shot has helped me recover many, many elk. The 8th tip is to practice how you hunt. If you plan to hunt with a face mask, you better practice with a face mask. I choose to not hunt with a face mask on. Here's why. So when you have a face mask on, you come to full draw, your anchor point is actually gonna push out just a little bit, because there's something pushing on your face. And also my bowstring comes right to the corner of my mouth, and with a face mask on, I can't feel it as well. And ultimately it's gonna impact your shots. You're probably gonna either shoot a little bit more left or a little bit more right. The other thing is gloves. Same deal. If you plan to hunt with gloves, you better practice with gloves. For the same reasons, it's going to change your impact point probably a little bit. Also, if you're using an index finger release, if you have a glove that goes over your index finger and all of a sudden you come to full draw, you might not be able to feel it very well. The other hack for gloves would be to cut off the finger or the thumb if you're using a thumb release. Just cut off the fabric around that so that you have thumb on release contact. And for tip number 9, once your pins are dialed, practice shooting at intermediate ranges. So instead of always shooting at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, shoot at 28, and then 43, and then 32, and then 56. Shoot all these in-between ranges so that you can really practice your pin gapping, because rarely in a hunting scenario is an animal gonna pop out exactly at 30 or 40 or 50. It's always gonna be some in-between range. And for tip number 10, to get the best broadhead or expandable or whatever flight of the arrow, you want to paper tune as well as bare shaft tune. And what these two things are going to do is verify that your arrow is impacting perfectly straight into the target or into the animal. You don't want your arrow entering the target like this, like sideways. You want it just going straight in, sideways. You're just not going to get as much penetration as an arrow that's going perfectly straight. The best way to tell if your bow is not shooting perfectly straight is to just shoot your target, say at 50 yards, walk up to the target, say you shoot 5 arrows, and see if they're all entering perfectly straight, or if they're all kind of entering at different cattywampus angles. If they're entering perfectly straight, you're good. If they're entering at weird angles, you definitely want a paper tune, and then follow that up with a bare shaft tune. As far as what broadheads to use, I like to shoot whatever is going to fly the best. So if I can get fixed blades to fly really good out to like 70, 80 yards, I will definitely shoot fixed blades. I love the Slick Trick Viper Tricks. It's basically a 2-blade with little bleeders on the side, basically a 4-blade. Wicked sharp, they fly really good. They're also super cheap. It's like $30 for a 4-pack, I think, versus a lot of these broadheads on the market right now. They might be like $30 a pop for one broadhead. $30 for one broadhead, that's expensive. The expandables that I really like, that I've shot a lot of elk, I've shot a lot of antelope, bears, kind of you name it. Grim Reaper expandable 3-blade. No O-rings, it just kind of expands with pressure. I do believe that at some point, every expandable is going to fail. I haven't had an expandable fail personally, but they're just not as burly, they're not as beefy as a fixed blade, so keep that in mind. The other thing on that is if you're shooting like 65 plus pound bow, the energy that's required for that bow or that arrow setup to open an expandable, it does take energy and it is going to ultimately impact your penetration, but it's not going to be enough to matter. If you're shooting like sub 50 pounds, I think you would be running a lot of risk shooting an expandable. I would not recommend it just because the energy required to open that expandable at sub 50 pound draw weight is gonna really impact your penetration, and you're trying to do everything you can to get as much penetration. So if you're shooting a lighter draw bow, absolutely fixed blade, just paper tune it and then bare shaft tune it. Like that thing's gonna fly awesome. And then if you're shooting a heavier poundage bow, shoot whatever you want, shoot whatever feels comfortable. And with either broadhead, just make a good shot. Definitely don't hit them like right in the shoulder socket. I feel like most animals, if you hit them in the shoulder socket, with regardless of what setup, you're gonna get about this much penetration. So anyway, I'll quit rambling. So that was 10 timeless archery elk hunting tips and tactics that I've learned from my 20 years of bow hunting elk. Hope it helps you this fall, and good luck out there.